AITA for choosing my mother over my wife for years, missing our anniversary for her emergency, and now watching my marriage crumble while my mother becomes increasingly unhinged, sending me nude photos and stalking my family until I had to call the police. I never thought I'd be typing this out to complete strangers, but I'm desperate and don't know where else to turn. My entire world is collapsing around me, and the worst part is that I'm starting to realize it's been my fault all along. I'm 36, and my wife is 28. We've been married for 4 years, together for 6, and have a beautiful 1-year-old daughter who means everything to me. My wife has been an incredible mother and partner from day one. My own mother, on the other hand, that's where the problems begin. Looking back, the red flags were always there. My mom has always been controlling, manipulative, and seemingly incapable of respecting boundaries. When my wife and I got engaged, my mother immediately took over wedding planning, imposing her vision on everything from the venue to the menu. Instead of standing up for my future wife, I convinced her to just go with it to keep the peace. My wife reluctantly agreed, but I can see now that she's never truly forgiven me for that betrayal. And yes, it was a betrayal. I just couldn't see it at the time. Over the years, my mother's passive-aggressive behavior toward my wife became increasingly obvious. Backhanded compliments about her cooking, snide remarks about her parenting choices, forgetting important dates related to my wife but remembering obscure anniversaries from my childhood. My wife tried to make it work in the beginning, but eventually, she grew to hate my mother. And I'll admit it now, I never established proper boundaries. I always made excuses. That's just how she is, or she means well, or the classic, she's my mother, what am I supposed to do? This brings me to 4 days ago, our wedding anniversary. We're on a tight budget right now with a new baby, modest salaries, and the general expenses of life. I suggested a simple but romantic evening. A family friend would watch our daughter, I'd buy a nice bottle of wine, and we'd cook dinner together and relax at home. I could tell my wife was disappointed we couldn't do something more extravagant, but she agreed it was the practical choice. We planned to both be home by 6 p.m. I was driving home from work around 5:30 when my mother called, hysterically crying about an emergency at her house. When I asked what was wrong, she just sobbed harder and begged me to come over immediately. I live in a low-traffic area, so I figured I could quickly check on her and still make it home for my anniversary. What I found when I arrived at my mother's house still makes my blood boil when I think about it. She was sitting calmly on her couch, sipping wine and watching TV. No emergency, no crisis, nothing remotely urgent. When I demanded to know what was so important that she'd made me rush over on my anniversary night, she revealed her emergency was a list of household chores she wanted me to complete. Washing dishes, watering plants, cleaning gutters, tasks she was absolutely capable of handling herself. I was livid, but somehow, and this is where I know I failed, she managed to guilt me into doing these chores anyway. She literally screamed that I was a bad son when I hesitated. I texted my wife to let her know I'd be late because I was at my mom's house. She didn't respond. Before I realized how much time had passed, it was 7:30 p.m. My mom kept trying to add more tasks to my list, but I finally put my foot down and headed home. When I arrived, my wife wasn't there. I called and texted her repeatedly, growing increasingly worried until I tracked her phone and discovered she was at her parents' house about 20 minutes away. She finally returned home at 11 p.m. I greeted her with a glass of champagne, trying to salvage what was left of our anniversary, but her response crushed me. Save it for yourself. I want a divorce. I broke down completely. Through tears, I asked why. Her answer was both simple and devastating. This was the final straw in a long pattern of me consistently putting my mother first. She pointed out that if I couldn't prioritize her even on our wedding anniversary, I never would. I begged her to consider counseling, but she refused, saying we were beyond that point. When I pathetically asked if there was someone else, she replied that the someone else was herself, that it was time for her to start prioritizing her own needs instead of competing with my mother for attention. She moved into our guest bedroom that night and barely spoke to me the next morning. When I tried to kiss her goodbye as she left to drop off our daughter, she simply moved out of my way. I was devastated but still somehow thought I could fix this. The next evening, unable to bear the silence between us, I knocked on the guest room door and tried to get her to come downstairs to talk. She refused, saying she wasn't ready to discuss anything yet. When I pressed her on when she might be ready, she shut the door in my face. Later that night, my mother showed up at our house unannounced, something she did frustratingly often. My wife answered the door, and I could hear my mother asking how our anniversary had been, her voice dripping with false concern. My wife called for me to come downstairs and handle my mother. That phrase immediately set my mom off, and she started interrogating my wife about what handle meant. By the time I got downstairs, my mom was verbally attacking my wife. And what did I do? I asked my wife what she'd said to provoke my mother. As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a catastrophic mistake. My wife went upstairs and slammed the guest room door without another word. I finally realized what was happening and asked my mom to leave. She refused. I had to threaten to call the police before she finally departed. The next morning, my wife packed her bags and our daughter's things and headed for the door. I managed to stop her in the doorway to ask what was happening. Her response was clear and final. She was done with the verbal abuse and ready to find a partner who would stand up for her. She said I would always put my mother first, and last night was just another example of that. She told me the relationship couldn't be salvaged and that she'd be contacting a divorce lawyer immediately. As a last desperate attempt, I asked what I could do to fix things. She just shook her head and left. I called a buddy to tell him what had happened. His reaction was blunt. "Congratulations, you played yourself." He called me denser than a brick and laughed when I said I still had hope for our marriage. "Put that idea to rest," he told me. After a few days of going back and forth with my wife via text, mostly me begging and her responding with short, practical messages about our daughter, I made the monumentally stupid decision to stay with my mother for a few days to clear my head. This proved to be eye-opening in the worst possible way. For the first time, I experienced firsthand the abuse my wife had been enduring, now directed entirely at me. My mother would scream at me over trivial matters, criticize everything I did, and then act hurt when I didn't show enough gratitude for her hospitality. But the most disturbing part happened at night. One morning, I woke up to find her snuggling against me in bed. I had to tell her to go back to her own room. This wasn't normal mother-son behavior, but somehow, I'd been conditioned to think it was just my mom being affectionate. I finally saw the light. I moved out of her house while she was sleeping and returned to my own home. Following advice from strangers on the internet who seemed to understand my situation better than I did, I blocked my mother on everything: phone, email, social media. I invested in a home security system, rekeyed all the locks, and locked the gates. My mother tried to show up several times, but couldn't get in. I also started therapy, naively thinking it would be a quick fix. During my first session, my therapist delivered a reality check. If I was only there to save my marriage, I should look elsewhere, because I needed extensive work on myself. Those words hit me like a freight train. Meanwhile, my wife and I entered a trial separation. She would only speak to me about our daughter, maintaining a cold, practical distance otherwise. I began to accept that while I might have been a bad husband, I could still strive to be a good father. But my mother wasn't done with us. She escalated in terrifying ways. She sent letters to both of us, called my wife's parents repeatedly, and left age-inappropriate toys for our daughter on our doorstep. We documented everything for our lawyer. Then came the truly disturbing incident. While at work, I received an email from an unfamiliar address with the subject line "Inquiry." It looked like a standard business email, so I opened it. Beneath some generic text about our company's services were 4 photos of my mother, topless, with a caption under each that said, "Where's my sweet boy?" I started shaking uncontrollably and had to rush to the bathroom to vomit. My mother had sent me nude photos through my work email, using my company's internet, possibly trying to get me fired. I immediately forwarded the email to our lawyer and blocked the address. When I spoke to my boss about the situation, he revealed that he'd received an email from the same address claiming I'd been unprofessional with clients. Thankfully, he was understanding and deleted the email. My therapist called this escalation and warned that it would likely get worse before it got better. She was right. My mother began trying to intercept us during shopping trips. We'd go to a grocery store 30 minutes from her home, and there she'd be, pacing outside like a predator waiting for prey. We'd have to turn around and shop elsewhere. Things reached a breaking point when my mother showed up at our house in a complete frenzy, screaming and crying, banging on our front gate, demanding to see me. The old me would have let her in, desperate to calm her down. The new me called the police. When they arrived, they ordered her to leave our property. I didn't feel good about it. Despite everything, she was still my mother, and I felt that weight of obligation. But I also recognized that her behavior had become dangerous to my family. The next escalation left me truly horrified. My mother started sending letters through the post office instead of dropping them in our mailbox, now including her return address. My wife forwarded hers directly to our lawyer without reading them. I opened mine because the envelope was unusually thick, with what looked like fuzz coming out of it. Inside, I found several locks of hair and a letter that said, "Look what you did to me." Some of the hair was short and coarse, which my wife believed was pubic hair. The letter also had what appeared to be drops of blood or red paint on the corners. I immediately called the police to do a wellness check on my mother, concerned she might be harming herself. A few weeks later, my mother drove to our house and had a psychotic break in front of our home that involved self-harm serious enough for us to call the police again. She was taken to a mental health facility for treatment. With the immediate threat somewhat contained, my wife approached me with a decision I'd been dreading. She still wanted the divorce. She explained that the past few months of us playing house had been for appearances in case my mother tried something with grandparents' rights, but she couldn't continue putting up with the chaos. She said it was affecting her own mental health, and she moved herself and our daughter back to her parents' house. When I asked if all the bad really outweighed the good in our relationship, she gave me the most stern look and said, "Our relationship has been almost nothing but bad," before walking away. Through continued therapy, I've been forced to confront some devastating truths. My therapist explained that my mother views me as her husband, a phenomenon called emotional incest. In my case, it occasionally crossed into physical territory with incidents like her snuggling me in bed, sending nude photos, and other small sexual activities that I had repressed from my childhood. Coming to terms with being sexually assaulted by my own mother as a minor has been one of the most painful processes of my life. Because my mother saw herself as my partner, she viewed my wife as competition. My mother never properly grieved my father's death, and in trying to protect me afterward, she turned me into what my therapist calls a son's band. Nearly every girlfriend I've ever had was never good enough for my mother because, in her mind, only she was good enough for me. Years of mental and emotional manipulation led me to believe her behavior was normal and just how she is. I feel robbed of a normal life, but I'm trying to channel my guilt into anger, not at my wife, who had every right to leave, but at the situation that warped my perception of normal relationships. My wife and I are now officially separated. She and our daughter are staying with her parents while I remain in our home. Divorce is imminent. The emptiness I feel is overwhelming, but I'm continuing with counseling to work through my feelings and determine next steps. Last week, my wife informed me that she's going to start dating other people. She said it was just a heads up in case I saw her out with someone. But hearing that she's meeting an old flame for dinner next weekend crushed what little hope I had left of reconciliation. I tried one final time to win her back, but she was firm. She said she's done coming second to my mother and now second to the drama that's consumed our lives. She doesn't want to raise our daughter in such an unhealthy environment. And honestly, I can't blame her. I'm not emotionally ready to date. I'm not even close. I'm still trying to process everything that's happened and rebuild some semblance of normalcy. I'm in my 30s. I still have time to create a good life and be a good father to my daughter. But right now, all I can do is continue therapy, maintain boundaries with my mother, and learn to put my daughter's needs first in a way I never did with my wife. So, internet strangers, am I the bad person in this story? I already know the answer. I failed my wife repeatedly by prioritizing my mother's wants over her needs. I allowed my mother to abuse her for years. I missed our anniversary for household chores. I asked my wife what she said to provoke my mother instead of defending her. And now I'm paying the price for those failures. I share this not to gain sympathy. I don't deserve any, but as a warning to others who might see themselves in me. If your relationship with your parent is causing problems with your partner, address it immediately. Establish boundaries. Seek help. Don't wait until it's too late, like I did.